"Will you stay if I show my scars?" the Apache woman asked the cowboy who risked his soul to protect. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of gold and red under the blazing sun. The wind swept across the dunes, carrying with it the dry scent of sagebrush and sand. In this lonely land, life was harsh, and survival required more than skill with a gun or a horse. It required patience, courage, and sometimes a little bit of luck. Silas rode his horse slowly, his hat pulled low over his eyes, the wide brim casting a shadow over his weathered face. He had been riding for days, following trails only he could read. The boy he once was had long been replaced by a man shaped by dust, danger, and regrets he would carry to his grave. The desert had taught him that most people were guided by fear or greed. He had seen friends disappear, enemies strike without warning, and towns burn to ash before the morning sun. Every mark on his body told a story, every scar a lesson. Yet despite all the hardship, he had a strange sense of honor. He believed that sometimes a man had to risk everything for a life that mattered, even if that life wasn't his own. And it was this belief that had led him deep into Apache territory, a place where outsiders were rarely welcome and where danger could strike from the shadows at any moment. As he rode, Silas noticed the tracks of another rider. They were not recent, but they were fresh enough to tell him someone had passed through the area recently. He squinted at the marks in the sand, and his instincts told him to proceed carefully. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of laughter, soft and distant, almost as if the desert itself was whispering a secret. He listened, trying to place the source, but all he could hear was the steady beat of his horse's hooves on the hard earth. Eventually, the tracks led him to a small clearing surrounded by twisted mesquite trees, and there, standing by a stream that glimmered under the sunlight, was a woman. She was unlike anyone Silas had ever seen. Her hair was dark and thick, flowing loosely over her shoulders, catching the light like strands of polished wood. Her skin was warm and sun-kissed, marked with lines that told stories of both pain and strength. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, yet her eyes were wary, watching Silas as if she could see into his very soul. Silas slowed his horse, tipping his hat slightly in a gesture of respect. He had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and he did not want to startle her. "I mean no harm," he said, his voice rough but calm. The words felt foreign on his tongue, almost like he was speaking them for the first time. The woman did not respond immediately. She simply studied him, her gaze steady and unflinching. There was a moment of silence, the kind that stretched and hung between two people, fragile and delicate, yet full of meaning. Finally, she spoke. "Why are you here, stranger?" Her voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of authority. It was not a question asked lightly, but one that demanded honesty. Silas felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from the intensity of her presence. "I'm just passing through," he said carefully. "I ride alone, and I keep to myself." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with curiosity. "Passing through is dangerous," she said. "These lands are not kind to strangers. You could get hurt, or worse." Silas nodded. He knew the dangers well, and he also knew that telling the truth sometimes required courage greater than drawing a gun. "I've been hurt before," he admitted quietly. "I can handle myself." For a moment, the woman seemed to relax, though only slightly. She turned and gestured toward the stream. "If you need water, drink, but be careful. The desert has a way of testing everyone who comes into it." Silas dismounted and led his horse to the stream. The water was clear and cool, a small miracle in a land so unforgiving. As he drank, He watched the woman move gracefully among the trees, her movements smooth and deliberate, almost like a dance that belonged to the desert itself. Silas could not help but wonder about her story. Who was she? How had she come to live in such a remote place? And why did she seem both strong and haunted at the same time? His curiosity was a dangerous thing, yet he could not resist it. He knew that in a land filled with shadows and secrets, finding someone like her was rare, perhaps even impossible. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, Silas felt a strange connection to this woman. She was not just a stranger. She was someone shaped by this land, just as he was. He noticed the faint scars on her arms, barely visible but enough to tell him that she had faced pain before. He did not ask about them. Some stories were too personal for words, but he recognized the weight of them, the kind that a person carried quietly, without complaint. "Do you live here alone?" he asked finally, breaking the silence that had settled between them. The question hung in the air, simple yet loaded with meaning. The woman paused, then nodded. "I do," she said. "My family, my people. This land is all I have left, and I protect it, just as you protect yourself." There was pride in her voice, but also a hint of sorrow, like someone carrying a heavy burden they could never set down. Silas studied her carefully. He understood what she meant. To protect something worth loving required strength and courage beyond measure. He had spent years learning this lesson himself, though his methods were often solitary and silent. He felt a sense of respect growing in him, a feeling he rarely experienced. This woman, with her quiet determination and wary heart, reminded him of the values he had almost forgotten: loyalty, honor, and the courage to face fear without turning away. As evening fell, the desert transformed into a canvas of orange and pink. Shadows stretched across the sand, and the air grew cooler. Silas and the woman sat by the stream, a cautious peace forming between them. Neither spoke much, but in the silence there was understanding. They were both survivors, shaped by the land and by life itself, and each recognized the other's strength. Before Silas rode off to set up camp for the night, the woman looked at him with a piercing gaze. "Strangers don't last long here," she said softly. "Be careful of what you risk in these lands. Not all dangers are outside, and not all wounds can be seen." Silas nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Some battles were fought with guns and fists, but the hardest battles were fought within one's own heart. That night, under the blanket of a star-filled sky, Silas thought about the woman. He thought about her courage, her scars, and the quiet way she carried herself in a world that had given her every reason to harden her heart. Trying to remain by its cars and never get chance on without had brought them together for a reason. Had no one knows what it was, perhaps this meeting was not by chance. Perhaps the desert, harsh and unyielding as it was, had brought them together for a reason. As he drifted to sleep by the campfire, Silas felt something he had not felt in a long time. A sense of hope. Not the kind born of certainty or comfort, but a fragile hope that even in a world full of pain, there were connections worth fighting for. He did not yet know what the future held, or if he and the woman would meet again, but he understood one thing clearly. Some people, some moments, left a mark that could not be erased, and he had just encountered one such moment. The next morning the sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the sand in shades of gold and pink. Silas awoke to the sound of birds calling in the distance and the faint rustle of wind through the mesquite trees. He stretched, feeling the aches of a body that had grown used to long rides and sleepless nights. Despite the hard land around him, there was a quiet beauty here, something that reminded him that not all of life was harsh and cruel. He packed his small camp quickly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of the desert. Each movement felt deliberate, measured, as if the land itself was watching him. Then, in the distance, he saw her again, the woman with the scars. Naeli. She was gathering water from the stream, her movements fluid, almost like a dance. For a moment, Silas just watched, admiring the calm way she moved, despite the tension that always seemed to linger around her. She looked up suddenly, and their eyes met. There was no fear this time, only recognition.
"You're up early," she said, her voice soft but steady.
Silas tipped his hat in acknowledgement. "The desert doesn't wait for anyone," he replied.
"And neither do I." There was a small pause, a quiet moment where the two of them simply looked at each other. It was a moment full of questions and unspoken thoughts. Silas wondered how someone could survive here alone, and Naeli wondered what brought this outsider so close to her home. Before either could speak further, a faint noise reached them. Shouts, voices that did not belong to the desert or its wildlife. Silas stiffened instantly, his instincts taking over. He had learned to recognize danger before it even arrived, and this felt dangerous. Naeli's body went tense, her hand brushing over a small dagger at her side. "Outlaws," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. They'd been moving closer. They mean to take what is not theirs. Silas nodded, understanding immediately. I don't know where I was. He had encountered men like this before. Greedy, violent, and willing to harm anyone in their path. "How many?" he asked, scanning the horizon with sharp eyes. Naeli shook her head. "I do not know. Enough to cause trouble." She didn't need to say more. Silas knew that in these parts, even a few could be deadly if underestimated. Without another word, Silas dismounted and approached Naeli. "We should warn the others," he said, "and prepare. The desert can hide more than sand. It hides danger." She looked at him, suspicion in her eyes, but also a flicker of hope. "You would risk yourself for strangers?" she asked. It was not a question of disbelief. It was a question of character. Silas had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. "Sometimes," he said simply, "protecting others is the only way to protect yourself." Together they rode toward her village, moving cautiously, every sense alert. The desert around them seemed to hold its breath. Birds took flight in sudden bursts, the wind carried whispers of movement, and the distant hills hid more than just rocks. Naeli led the way, her knowledge of the land precise, while Silas followed, silent and focused. He noticed the way she moved, careful yet confident, each step showing a familiarity with a world that could be both beautiful and deadly. As they neared the village, signs of unease became clear. Smoke from small fires rose into the air, and villagers hurried along the paths, their faces etched with worry. Children clung to mothers, and men sharpened weapons, preparing for whatever threat loomed. Silas felt the tension in the air, a living thing that wrapped around him like a cloak. Naeli guided him through the streets, introducing him quietly to the villagers. "This is Silas," she said. "He is here to help." Some of the villagers looked at him warily, their hands tightening on tools and weapons. Strangers were rare here, and trust was earned, not given. Silas nodded respectfully to each person he passed, letting his actions show that he meant no harm. He had learned that trust could not be demanded. It had to be demonstrated through deed. Naeli led him to a small gathering of elders who sat around a fire discussing the growing threat. Outlaws had been raiding nearby settlements, Naeli explained. "We fear they will come here next. We need a plan." The elders nodded solemnly, their eyes betraying both fear and determination. Silas could feel the weight of their responsibility, the burden they carried for their people. He spoke quietly, offering suggestions, strategies to defend the village. "If they attack during the day, they will have the advantage," he said. "But if we use the terrain, the narrow paths, and the element of surprise, we can defend ourselves."
"We can protect everyone." His voice was calm, steady, and the villagers listened, some skeptically, some with hope.
Naeli stood beside him, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and cautious optimism. She had seen many outsiders claim to help, only to leave when the danger became real. But something in Silas felt different. Over the next few hours, they worked together, reinforcing barriers, setting watches, and preparing strategies for the worst-case scenario. Silas admired the way Naeli organized the villagers, guiding them with a mix of firmness and compassion. Despite her scars and the hardship she had endured, she radiated strength. He noticed the quiet way she encouraged the children to stay calm, the gentle tone she used with the elders, and the fearless way she faced danger herself. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the village, Silas and Naeli took a brief moment to rest. They sat on a low rock, watching the horizon together. Silas could feel the tension in her body, the burden she carried for her people. "You've faced a lot," he said quietly. Naeli glanced at him, surprised that he could see it. "And you think a stranger can understand?" she asked. Silas shook his head. "Not understand, but recognize. I've carried my own burdens. I know what it's like to stand alone, knowing the world could turn against you at any moment." For a moment, they were silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and dust. Silas noticed the faint scars on Naeli's arms again, reminders of battles fought and hardships endured. He did not ask about them directly. Some stories were too personal, too painful, but he understood the courage it took to survive, to protect, and to keep moving forward despite the past. That night, as the village settled under the blanket of darkness, Silas took watch by the edge of the settlement. Naeli moved among her people, checking on the guards and ensuring everyone was prepared. They worked silently, their shared purpose creating an unspoken bond. Each knew that danger could come at any moment, but neither let fear take control. Instead, they relied on skill, courage, and the trust they were slowly building. Hours passed, the stars moving across the sky in their slow, eternal rhythm. Silas felt a strange sense of connection, not just to Naeli, but to the people of the village. He had come as an outsider, but now he felt part of something larger than himself. Protecting others was no longer just about survival. It was about honor, courage, and the fragile hope that even in a harsh world, kindness and bravery could make a difference. By the time the first light of dawn touched the desert, Silas and Naeli were exhausted, but ready. The village was quiet, almost serene, though the tension remained just beneath the surface. Each knew that the real test was coming, that the outlaws could strike at any moment, but together they had prepared, and for the first time in a long while, Silas felt that he was not entirely alone. As they watched the sunrise, Naeli spoke softly, her voice carrying both strength and uncertainty. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone would stay if they truly saw all of my scars," she said. Silas looked at her, surprised at the honesty, the vulnerability in her words. He did not answer immediately, knowing that words were not enough. Instead, he simply nodded, letting her know that he understood in a way deeper than speech. The morning air was still and quiet, the desert holding its breath, as if waiting for what would come next. Silas and Naeli, two people shaped by hardship and courage, prepared to face the coming storm. They did not know what the day would bring, but one thing was certain: they would face it together, their bond strengthened by trust, respect, and the shared willingness to risk everything for the lives of those they cared about. And so, with the desert stretching endlessly around them, they waited, ready to defend the village, ready to confront danger, and ready to discover just how far courage could take them in a world where survival was never guaranteed. The day began quietly, almost too quiet. The sun rose over the desert, its rays burning gold against the sand and rocks. Yet the air was heavy with anticipation. Silas and Naeli moved among the villagers, checking every corner, every watchtower, every path leading into their settlement. Each moment of silence seemed to stretch, carrying the weight of the threat they had been expecting. Silas could feel his heart beating faster than usual, not from fear of the outlaws alone, but from the responsibility he now carried for the lives of these people. Naeli moved gracefully, yet every step showed the careful calculation of someone who had survived far too many battles. Silas admired her strength, the way she commanded respect without raising her voice, and the quiet determination in her eyes. Yet he could also see the tension hiding behind her composed exterior. Every so often she would glance toward the distant hills, her hands tightening around the straps of her pack. Silas knew those hills held more than just shadows. They were the hiding places of those who sought to bring chaos to her village. Hours passed slowly. The villagers were tense but obedient, following Naeli's instructions as she and Silas reinforced barriers, moved livestock to safer areas, and stationed lookouts along the desert paths. Silas had never seen a community work so efficiently under pressure. He knew that courage alone could not protect them. It required strategy, observation, and the willingness to act without hesitation. He watched Naeli, noticing the subtle ways she encouraged the younger villagers, calming their fears while still maintaining authority. Then, as the sun reached its peak, a faint sound carried across the desert, a soft clatter, almost like a distant drumbeat. Silas froze instantly, straining his ears. Naeli's head snapped in the same direction, her eyes narrowing.
"They're coming," she said quietly, her voice steady but sharp.
The sound grew louder, the rhythm of horse hooves pounding against the sand, and soon a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Silas mounted his horse quickly, his heart thumping with a mix of adrenaline and determination. The outlaws came into view, their faces harsh and unyielding, their weapons ready. Silas counted at least a dozen men, but he knew numbers alone did not determine the outcome. Skill, strategy, and courage mattered just as much. He turned to Naeli. "We have to protect them," he said. "Two." She nodded, her eyes flashing with determination. "We will. Stand with me." And in that moment, Silas realized something he had not expected. He did not just stand with her out of duty or honor. He stood because he had come to care, deeply, for the woman and the people she protected. The outlaws rode closer, shouting threats, their intentions clear. Silas and Naeli moved to the forefront of the village, their presence steadying the villagers who had been frightened moments before. Silas felt a strange mixture of fear and courage. Fear, because he knew how quickly chaos could turn deadly. Courage, because he had faced worse and survived, but there was something different this time. This was not just about survival. It was about protecting a community that trusted him, and a woman who had already earned his respect and admiration. The first clash was sudden. A few outlaws attempted to rush past the barriers, but Silas and Naeli were ready. Silas dismounted quickly, using the horse's momentum to surprise the attackers. Nayeli moved with the precision of someone who had fought for survival all her life, her small blade striking with speed and accuracy. Together, they created a formidable defense, their movements coordinated almost instinctively, as if they had been fighting side by side for years. Despite their preparation, the battle was fierce. The outlaws were ruthless, taking advantage of every opportunity. Silas fought with a controlled fury, each movement calculated to protect rather than harm unnecessarily. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, sharpening his senses and heightening his awareness. But he also noticed the strain on Nayeli's face, the slight tremor in her hands, as she fended off attackers while keeping her people safe. He realized that beneath her strength, she carried fear too. Fear for her village, for her family, and perhaps for herself. At one point, an outlaw broke through the outer defense, aiming for the children huddled near the center of the village. Silas moved faster than he had thought possible, placing himself between the man and the children. In a sudden, precise movement, he disarmed the outlaw, sending the weapon clattering to the sand. The children watched, wide-eyed and silent, as Silas helped them back to safety. Nayeli joined him, her face pale but resolute, her eyes meeting his. In that brief moment, neither spoke, but their shared understanding was clear. They could not fail. As the battle continued, Silas noticed Nayeli falter slightly. An outlaw had managed to get behind her, swinging a heavy club. Silas reacted instantly, intercepting the blow with his arm and taking the man down with a swift strike. Nayeli looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You saved me," she said quietly, though there was no time for more words. Silas shook his head, focusing on the battle around them. "We save each other," he said simply. It was more than a statement. It was a promise. Hours seemed to stretch into an eternity. The outlaws pressed hard, testing the villagers' defenses and trying to break their spirit. Yet, the village held. Silas and Nayeli moved among the people, guiding, protecting, and inspiring courage. Every time someone faltered, they were there to steady them. Every time a threat emerged, they faced it head-on. By late afternoon, the outlaws were tired, frustrated by the resilience of the defenders and the determination of the two who had become the heart of the village's resistance. Finally, the outlaws began to retreat, realizing that this village would not yield easily. Silas and Nayeli watched from the edge of the settlement as the dust cloud from their departure faded into the horizon. The villagers let out a collective sigh of relief, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and awe. Children hugged their parents, elders nodded in quiet respect, and Silas finally allowed himself a small, tired smile. Nayeli approached him, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, her eyes reflecting both relief and lingering fear.
"We made it," she said softly.
Silas nodded, his gaze steady. "For now," he replied. "But we must remain vigilant. They may return." Nayeli placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of trust and gratitude. "And when they do, we will be ready," she said firmly. In the aftermath of the battle, Silas took a moment to reflect. He had faced many dangers in his life, but this fight was different. It was not just about survival or revenge. It was about protecting something meaningful, something worth fighting for. And in that realization, he also understood something else. His connection to Nayeli was growing stronger. He did not yet fully comprehend the depth of it, but he knew that the question she had once asked, the one about scars and trust, was no longer hypothetical. The scars they both carried, both seen and unseen, had brought them together in a way that neither could ignore. As evening fell, the village gathered to tend to the wounded and repair the damage. Silas helped where he could, offering practical assistance, and quiet encouragement. Naeli moved among the people, guiding them with her usual calm authority. At one point, she paused near Silas, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, something he could not yet name. "You risked yourself for us," she said. "For me." Silas met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. "I risk myself for what is right," he replied. "And you? You are worth protecting." For the first time, Nayeli allowed herself a small smile, a rare softness in her otherwise guarded demeanor. She did not speak again, but the understanding between them was clear. They had faced danger together, relied on each other in moments of fear, and discovered that trust and courage could grow even in the harshest circumstances. The bond they had formed was no longer fragile. It was tempered by fire, strengthened by shared struggle, and marked by the silent acknowledgement of scars that each carried. That night, as the stars blanketed the desert sky, Silas and Nayeli sat quietly near the edge of the village, watching the flickering fires and listening to the faint sounds of recovery. Neither spoke much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with the unspoken truth of what they had endured together. Silas knew that the days ahead would bring more challenges, more dangers, and more decisions that could change their lives forever. But he also knew that for the first time in a long while he was not alone. The turning point had come, not with grand words or declarations, but with action, courage, and mutual trust. Silas had faced danger not just for himself, but for Nayeli and the people she loved. Nayeli had allowed herself to rely on someone else, to let a stranger stand with her when the stakes were highest. In that moment, they had discovered the strength of partnership, the power of loyalty, and the fragile beauty of trust in a world that often seemed cruel and unforgiving. And as the desert night stretched on, filled with the quiet hum of life slowly returning to normal, Silas and Nayeli both understood that nothing would ever be the same. The outlaws had tested them, but they had also revealed something far more important: the courage to face danger, the willingness to trust, and the recognition that scars, both theirs and others, could become the foundation for something stronger, something lasting, and something real. The desert seemed almost peaceful the next morning, though the village was still tense. Everyone knew the outlaws might return at any time, and the memory of the previous day's attack hung heavy in the air. Silas rode along the outer edges of the village, scanning the distant hills for any movement, while Nayeli moved through the streets, quietly checking on her people. Their earlier victory had brought relief, but it had also reminded them both of how fragile life could be. Silas noticed something in Nayeli's eyes that he had not seen before. It was not fear exactly, but a weight she carried quietly, a burden she had kept hidden even from herself. He had seen her strength, her skill, and her courage, but now he wondered what else she had endured, what hidden scars lay beneath the surface of her calm exterior. He wanted to ask, to reach through the walls she had built, but he also knew some walls were not meant to be knocked down lightly. The calm was broken by a sudden scream from the edge of the village. Silas spurred his horse forward, adrenaline surging through him. Nayeli was already moving, her pace swift and determined. They reached the source together, finding one of the villagers cornered by two outlaws who had slipped through a hidden path. Silas reacted instantly, disarming one with a precise movement while Nayeli blocked the other, her dagger flashing in the sunlight. They worked together seamlessly, protecting the villager and pushing the attackers back into the desert. But this was only the beginning. As the day wore on, a larger group of outlaws appeared, moving faster and more aggressively than before. They had clearly regrouped, learning from their previous failure. Silas felt his heart tighten. The stakes were higher now, and the danger was real. Nayeli moved to organize the villagers, guiding them to safety while still preparing to defend their home. She barked orders with authority, her voice cutting through the chaos. Silas saw the strain in her posture, the tension in her jaw, and he knew that even the strongest people could only hold so much weight. Then it happened. One of the outlaws, taller and stronger than the others, broke through the defenses and lunged at Nayeli. Silas reacted instantly, placing himself between her and the man. They struggled, the outlaw swinging a heavy club, and Silas barely managed to block it. Nayeli was momentarily pinned, her dagger slipping from her grasp. Silas grabbed her arm and pulled her to safety, both of them stumbling back to the edge of the village. Nayeli's face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. She looked at Silas with eyes that were both frightened and defiant. I cannot fail them," she whispered. Silas held her steady. "You are not failing," he said firmly. "We are in this together. You don't have to do it alone." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth that seemed to reach her. Nayeli nodded slightly, taking a deep breath and gripping her dagger again. The battle raged around them, but now there was something different. Silas could feel the connection between them growing stronger, deeper. Every move they made, every decision, was tied to protecting each other as well as the villagers. And then, in a quiet moment, amidst the chaos, Nayeli stopped fighting for a second. Her eyes fell to a faint scar across her cheek, one that Silas had not noticed before. She touched it lightly with her fingers, a gesture of both memory and pain. "I've carried these scars for a long time," she said softly, almost to herself. Silas looked at her, realizing that this was more than just a physical mark. These scars represented loss, suffering, and moments she had survived that no one else could understand. "The world sees strength," she continued, "but it rarely sees what we endure to survive." Silas reached for her hand, taking it gently. "I see them," he said quietly, "and I see you, all of you. Not just the scars, but the courage, the determination, and the heart that makes you who you are." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the chaos of battle seemed to fade. The shouting, the clashing, the fear, it all became background noise. Nayeli's hand tightened slightly around his. Will you stay if I show all of this?" she asked, her voice trembling with both hope and fear. Silas did not hesitate. "I'm already here," he said simply, "and I'm not going anywhere." The connection between them was broken suddenly by a loud crash as another outlaw tried to attack from behind. Silas reacted instinctively, pushing Nayeli out of the way and confronting the threat. Their battle was not graceful. It was messy, fast, and desperate, but it was effective. Silas fought with every ounce of skill and strength he had, knowing that the safety of Nayeli and the village depended on him. Nayeli, recovering quickly, moved beside him, her movements precise and deadly. They were no longer just two fighters. They were a team, an unstoppable force born of trust and necessity. Hours passed like minutes. The outlaws were relentless, but so were Silas and Nayeli. Each attack that came their way was met with strategy, courage, and quick thinking. Silas could feel exhaustion setting in, yet he refused to give in. He looked at Nayeli, noticing her determination despite the fatigue, and he realized that courage was contagious. Her bravery gave him strength, and his presence gave her hope. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the last of the outlaws fled. The village was battered but intact, and the people had survived. Silas and Nayeli stood together, breathing heavily, their faces streaked with sweat and dust. They looked at each other and smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and recognition. The danger had passed, but something far more profound had occurred. They had faced fear, physical danger, and the weight of the past, and come through stronger, connected by trust and mutual respect. After the battle, the villagers gathered, tending to the wounded and repairing damage. Silas and Naeli moved quietly among them, offering guidance, support, and comfort. The children clung to Naeli, and she smiled at them, a gentle, rare softness showing through. Silas watched, noticing the way her eyes softened when she was with her people, and he realized just how much courage it took for her to protect them every day. That night, under the quiet light of stars, Naeli led Silas to a small, secluded part of the village, away from the fires and the sounds of recovery. She stood silently for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "There are things I've never shared with anyone," she said softly. "Things I've hidden behind these scars. And yet today I realize that hiding does not protect me anymore."
It only keeps me alone. Silas took her hand, his voice calm and steady.
"You're not alone," he said. "You don't have to hide from me. Your past, your scars, they are part of what makes you who you are. And I accept all of it." For the first time, Naeli allowed herself to truly open up. She told him about the battles she had faced, the losses she had endured, and the moments of fear she had hidden from everyone around her. Silas listened without interruption, his hand never leaving hers. He did not flinch at her pain. Instead, he respected it, understood it, and honored it. And in return, he shared pieces of his own past, the mistakes, regrets, and scars that had shaped him into the man he was today. By the time the first light of dawn touched the desert again, something fundamental had changed between them. They had faced not only external danger, but the deeper fear of being truly seen. And in doing so, they had forged a bond that went beyond trust. It was a bond of shared courage, understanding, and acceptance. Naeli looked at Silas, her eyes no longer guarded. "I believe now," she said softly, "that some people do stay even when they see everything, even when they see all the scars." Silas nodded. "And I'm here," he said, "for all of it. For you, for this village, for what matters." The climax had not come with grand words or dramatic gestures, but through shared action, vulnerability, and trust. They had survived the worst, faced the greatest fears, and discovered something far more powerful than either of them had expected: the strength of connection, the courage to be seen fully, and the understanding that love and loyalty could grow even in the harshest, most unforgiving places. As the desert stretched endlessly around them, Silas and Naeli stood together, ready for whatever came next. They knew that life would not always be easy, that challenges and dangers would continue to arrive, but for the first time, they also knew that they could face them together, and in that realization, both felt a quiet peace, a deep and unshakable certainty that they were stronger together than apart, and that sometimes the greatest battles were not fought with weapons, but with courage, trust, and the willingness to show the world one's scars. The morning after the battle dawned calm and clear, the desert sky stretching endlessly above the village. Birds called softly in the distance, their songs carrying across the sand and sagebrush. Silas and Naeli walked slowly through the village, taking in the quiet aftermath of the chaos. The sun touched the rooftops, highlighting the small repairs made overnight, the soot-stained walls, and the efforts of villagers to return life to normal. Everything was not perfect, but the sense of survival and resilience was strong. Naeli paused to watch children play in the dusty courtyard, their laughter light and free after the dark shadow of fear that had loomed over them. She felt a gentle warmth in her chest, a feeling she had not allowed herself to feel for a long time. Silas stood beside her, watching quietly, his horse tied nearby, waiting patiently. The events of the past days weighed heavily on them both, yet there was a sense of peace that only comes after surviving something life-changing. "You know," Nayeli said softly, her voice barely above the sound of the wind, "I've spent my life believing that strength meant never showing weakness, that no one should ever see the parts of you that hurt the most." She glanced at Silas, her dark eyes searching his. "But after everything, I realized that strength is also in trusting someone, even when it's hard." Silas nodded. "I know what you mean," he said. "I've spent my life on the road, alone, carrying my own mistakes and regrets like a shadow. But sometimes letting someone in doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger." He looked at her, seeing both courage and vulnerability in her expression. "You've carried so much, Nayeli, and yet, here you are. Still standing, still protecting others."
That's real strength. They walked together through the village, speaking little but understanding much.
The villagers were beginning to emerge from their homes, smiling, laughing softly, and tending to daily life once more. Silas noticed how the small tasks, simple routines, and quiet care for one another gave the people a sense of purpose and hope. He thought of the danger they had all faced, the outlaws that had threatened their lives, and realized that the courage he had seen in them, and in Nayeli, was something extraordinary. Over the next few days, Silas stayed with the village, helping rebuild fences, repair homes, and organize supplies. Nayeli worked tirelessly alongside him, guiding the people, teaching them strategies to protect themselves, and encouraging them to recover not just physically, but emotionally. They moved together seamlessly, as if they had always known how to support one another. Slowly, Silas began to understand something he had not anticipated. He was no longer a stranger in this land. He was part of something greater, something that mattered beyond himself. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Silas and Nayeli stood together on a small hill overlooking the village. The light of the setting sun cast long, golden shadows across the desert, bathing everything in warmth. Nayeli turned to him, her face calm yet reflective. "I used to think that the past defines who we are," she said quietly. "But now I see. The past is only a part of the story. What we choose to do today, how we face the future, that defines us more." Silas considered her words. He had spent years haunted by choices he could not undo, regrets that followed him like a shadow across the plains. But standing beside Nayeli, watching her care for her people, he felt something shift within himself. "I've carried my past for so long," he said softly, "but I realize now that I don't have to let it control me. I can use it to be better, to protect, to help. That's what matters." Nayeli smiled faintly, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes and softens even the hardest moments. "And you have," she said. "You've shown courage, not just with your hands, but with your heart. That is something rare in this world." Silas felt a warmth in his chest he could not fully explain, a sense of belonging and hope he had not felt in years. As the village continued to recover, Silas and Nayeli spent time together, teaching the younger villagers skills they would need to protect themselves, sharing stories and quietly enjoying each other's company. Slowly, the bond between them deepened. They laughed more freely, shared memories of past struggles, and found comfort in knowing that someone truly understood them. For Silas, this was more than companionship. It was a connection that made him feel whole. For Nayeli, it was a revelation that trust and courage could coexist, and that showing one's scars did not push people away, but drew the right people closer. One evening, after the work of the day was done, Nayeli led Silas to a quiet spot near the stream where they had first met. The water shimmered under the soft light of the moon, and the air was calm and cool. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and vulnerability. "Do you remember the first time I asked you if you would stay if I showed my scars?" she asked. Silas nodded. "I remember," he said, "and I said I would."
Nayeli took a deep breath, the faintest tremble in her voice. Back then, I didn't know if anyone could truly stay.
"I didn't know if anyone could accept everything I carry, everything I've been through." She looked down at her hands, tracing a faint scar on her wrist. "But now I know." "You can, and that is more than I could have hoped for." Silas took her hands in his, holding them gently. "Nayeli," he said, "I'm here because I choose to be. Not because it's easy, not because I have to, but because I want to. Your scars, your past, your courage, they are part of what makes you who you are. And I would not want you any other way." A silence fell over them, but it was not empty. It was filled with understanding, respect, and the quiet recognition of what they had both endured. In that moment, the harsh desert around them felt softer, warmer, as if it too recognized the bond that had formed through trials and trust. In the days that followed, life in the village began to return to a rhythm. The fences were repaired, the livestock safe, and the villagers more confident in their ability to protect themselves. Silas and Nayeli continued to work together, but now with a sense of peace. Danger was still possible in the desert, but they had learned that courage, trust, and connection were as important as any weapon. Nayeli began to share more of her story with the villagers, not as a burden, but as a lesson. She spoke of the challenges she had faced, the fears she had overcome, and the strength that came from facing them. Silas stood beside her, quietly supporting her, proud of her courage and of the way she inspired others. Together, they taught the villagers that scars, whether seen or hidden, did not define weakness. They defined resilience, bravery, and the power to survive. As the sun set on the desert once more, Silas and Nayeli sat together on the hill overlooking the village. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with shades of pink, purple, and gold. They sat in quiet reflection, not needing words, letting the peace of the moment sink in. Silas felt a deep sense of belonging, a feeling that had eluded him for years. Nayeli felt a lightness in her heart, knowing that she was no longer carrying her burdens alone. Finally, Nayeli spoke softly, her voice filled with hope. "Life will not always be easy. There will be challenges, and sometimes fear will return. But I know now that I can face them, because I am not alone." Silas nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "And I will face them with you," he said. "We are stronger together than apart, and we will protect what matters." The desert stretched endlessly around them, vast and unchanging, yet full of life and possibility. Silas and Nayeli had faced danger, fear, and the scars of the past, and they had come through stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. They had learned that courage is not just in fighting battles, but in facing the truth, trusting another person, and embracing the scars that make each of us human. As night fell and stars blanketed the sky, Silas and Nayeli looked at each other, smiling faintly. They knew the future held uncertainty, but they also knew that together they could face anything. They had discovered the greatest lesson of all, that scars do not push people away. They bring the right people closer, and that trust, courage, and love could grow even in the harshest, most unforgiving places. And so, In the quiet peace of the desert night, Silas and Nayeli chose to stay, not out of duty, not out of obligation, but out of hope, trust, and the deep understanding that some bonds are forged through fire and survive through care, courage, and unwavering respect. Life would go on, but now they faced it together, stronger, braver, and united by the lessons of the past and the promise of a future worth protecting.